So just would like to welcome everyone here this morning. It's particularly wonderful for us to have Chris joining us in her afternoon from North Carolina, actually, not quite Georgia, but two states that have been very high in the news, especially if you're watching the Associated Press. So just some of the formalities that I'm sure we're used to, but if this is your first time joining us for the Auckland Maths Association online, we welcome you. And we really invite you to introduce yourself in the chat, and if you've got questions, to post them in the chat, and just make sure your chat's set to send to everyone. We really ask if you can stay on mute. We welcome you to have your video on, but we're not upset if you don't, because we know that some people get a little bit freaked about seeing themselves online. We are recording the session and it will be available later. If you do drop out of the meeting, just rejoin using the link we sent you in the email and we'll let you back in. So I think I'm just about to introduce Chris, and just want to share with you this beautiful picture. This is actually from my garden, not currently, but last year. So Robin and I have been having a bit of a flower theme for our slides this year. So it is my greatest pleasure to introduce Chris Franklin from the States. I have worked with Chris really closely on some of the work she's going to be sharing with you today. And she is going to talk to you about the role of questioning and non-traditional data types. And this is related to the GAZE 2 document, which is going to come out soon. And I'm sure that Chris is going to spend a little bit of time telling you all about that. So it is my turn to hand over to Chris. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and mute and leave it all to you, Chris.
All right. Well, let's see if I can share my screen. Here we go. Do you see that? All right. I'm working on my laptop, so I'm going to be a little bit slow here with my real estate. Okay. So here we go, the role of questioning and non-traditional data types guided by GAZE 2. And so let's get started. I thought I might just show you what's happened since I was in New Zealand last year. It's hard to believe it was a year ago that I was there for 3 weeks for the math conference, and what a great trip that was. And I never imagined what 2020 would bring us, especially here in the States, since I was there. But one of the great joys for me and for my husband and family is that I am now a grandmother. September 23rd, my grandson, Henry Franklin Green, was born in Blacksburg, Virginia. And so I'm thinking about retiring and becoming a full-time mama, and taking my son to baseball games and teaching him how to score. So that's my future goal. But I did want to share my great news with you. I'm really grateful that you gave me this opportunity to join you today and to talk about our new GAZE 2 document. And this document is actually going to be out in probably 1 to 2 weeks. It will be uploaded on the American Statistical Association website, and it will also be available, a print version that you can order through Amazon. So I'm going to give you just a little bit of brief history about GAZE 1, talk about GAZE 2, and then give you 2 examples from the document that I thought you might enjoy. And then I'll end the presentation with talking about some pillars of statistical reasoning and data science. All right, so let's see. So as statistics educators, I think we all embrace the vision that was stated in the original pre-K through 12 GAZE. And that is that every high school graduate should be able to use sound statistical reasoning, intelligently cope with the requirements of citizenship, employment, and to be prepared for a healthy, happy, and productive life. When we wrote this document, I don't think the writers actually realized at the time that the impact that this document would have. And 15 years later, we're really excited to bring out an updated version of this document. In the document itself, let's see, you can see that the framework was structured as a two-dimensional model defined by what we call the process components of the statistical problem-solving process, and then by the developmental levels that students would go through, level A, level B, and level C. Now, those process components probably look familiar to you, but you're much more used to 5 process components with the PDAC. And basically, this is the same. We just made it 4 processes instead of 4 process components instead of 5. We decided to use levels, developmental levels, instead of grade levels. Actually, level A is somewhat equivalent to elementary. Level B would be middle, or I think what you call intermediate, and C would be secondary. But we used A, B, and C because we realized that so many students, and actually adults, as far as statistical reasoning is concerned, would actually need to start at level A, regardless of their actual age. The pre-K through 12 GAZE has really had a significant impact on the inclusion of statistics standards in our country. Now, in the United States, we do have national standards now called the Common Core standards, but it's still up to our individual 50 states as to whether they actually adopt the Common Core standards. So even though we have slightly more uniformity in our state standards in the US, there's still a lot of variation from one state to the other. In the Common Core standards, statistics actually made an impact in what we call our grades 6 through 12, which would be your 7 through 13 in New Zealand. But fortunately, because of the sort of the data science movement that is now starting to go on in the United States to get more statistics and data science into K through 12, many states are now starting to integrate the statistics starting with our kindergarten, which is your grade 1 in the United States, all the way through high school. So we're actually quite excited about that. And I think that's why we're also very excited that we now have this updated version of GAZE, which is addressing some of the more modern issues that we're dealing with when it comes to statistics. We also have a Spanish version of GAZE that you can find at the website. And we're just really thrilled that GAZE has been used internationally. It's been used in New Zealand, it's been used in Australia. I could just go the United Kingdom. It's been used in many South American countries. In fact, some colleagues in South America are already talking to us about a Spanish translation of GAZE too. So we're quite excited about that. Okay. The impact that the GAZE document has had in other areas is, I think, pretty important. One area is assessment. In case you're not familiar with the LOCUS project, and I think Anna's going to put the link for you in the chat. This is called Levels of Conceptual Understanding in Statistics. And we actually like to think about this as the A part of GAZE, the assessment part of GAZE. But if you go to this website, you can find just a wealth of questions at all levels, A, B, and C, that are very conceptual in nature for testing and assessing statistics, both multiple choice and open-ended responses. You'll also find critiques of the questions. You'll find student work. It is just a wonderful website. You will also find that there are practice exams that you can actually give students to use. So I highly recommend that you look at the LOCUS site. The GAZE document has also influenced many National Science Foundation grants that have occurred in the United States. It's influenced MOOCs. Many of you may be familiar with some of Holly Lynn Lee's MOOCs with preparing teachers to teach statistics, where GAZE has been used. The last time I checked, there were about 779 scholarly citations for the use of the GAZE document in statistical research, statistics education research. So where are we now? Well, 15 years later, from the publication of GAZE 1, we as statistics educators are now faced with acknowledging and adapting to the reality that the traditional concepts of data have changed. And that is, data are no longer simply numbers and context, classified as either quantitative or categorical and stored in static worksheets or spreadsheets. Today, data can also be dynamic, highly structured or unstructured collections of pictures and sound. So when pre-K through 12 GAZE 1 was written, the focus was on traditional data types, from both quantitative to categorical variables. The focus was on study designs using smaller data sets of samples from a population. This is also true about most of what we've been seeing taught in our schools. But today, data sets are now vast and readily available. And more than ever, we must help our students beginning at a very young age to become more data savvy, working with not only small data sets, but also large and messy data sets. Not only traditional data, but also non-traditional data. And not only primary data, but also secondary data. And so that was the motivating reason to update the GAZE document to GAZE 2. So the pre-K through 12 GAZE 2 incorporates enhancements and new skills needed for making sense of data today, while maintaining the spirit of the original GAZE. So I wanted to give you a quick picture of the writing team. This is kind of an old picture of us. You'll notice I have short hair. I no longer have as short a hair because I can't get a haircut and be safe with COVID in the United States. You can see Pips in this picture, but this is at one of our writing meetings. So I wanted to share the team with you. So core to the GAZE 2 document is still the statistical problem solving process. And you'll notice that we've tweaked the wording of a couple of our components. So for example, instead of just saying now formulate statistical questions, we're saying formulate statistical investigative questions. And part of this, of course, is because one of the clarifications that we wanted to bring about with GAZE 2 was the role of questioning throughout the process, not just the initial formulation of questions. And so we wanted to try to make a distinction about the type of questions that we're asking at each stage of the process. The other tweaking that we did is, instead of now just collect the data, we now say collect/consider the data. And one of the motivations for this was the abundance of secondary data that students are now working with, so that they can help make that distinction between the primary and the secondary data and the different inferences that we can make from that. Okay. So especially given the computational ability now available, as stated in GAZE 2, it is critical that statisticians or anyone who uses data be more than just data crunchers. They should be data problem solvers who interrogate the data and utilize questioning throughout the statistical problem solving process to make decisions with confidence, understanding that the art of communication with the data is essential. That is what we saw as our goal with GAZE 2. So here is a list of major enhancements that we tried to address in the document, keeping in mind that from 2005 to now, more research has occurred in statistics education and data has expanded and evolved. The updated GAZE 2 accounts for these changes while highlighting needing skills such as questioning throughout the statistical process, and several of the updated examples now have a science focus and using non-traditional data, and also the use of technology, which you did not see as much in GAZE 1. So with all of that in mind, with that introduction, I'd like to talk about a couple of examples. So here, keep the framework in your mind as we go through these two scenarios. So let's start with level A. And our level A example I'm going to present is about ladybugs. And I have to say up front, I think we've got 22 examples in the GAZE 2 document, and I'd have to say this is probably my favorite. So I'm a bit biased toward the ladybugs. So even at a young age, GAZE 2 promotes that elementary students be presented with data in non-traditional forms and learning how to ask questions and make sense of that data. So suppose that students in an elementary class have been reading a book or books about ladybugs. They notice that the ladybugs illustrated in the books vary in size, they vary in color, and they vary in number of spots. They wonder what a typical ladybug looks like. So how might the students investigate this question? So this is one of the more new science-focused examples in GAZE 2. And do keep in mind, there are places where teachers can actually order live ladybugs that you can use in this investigation. But what we're proposing is that you use an alternative, which is to find photos of ladybugs. So you could either use photos or you might use illustrations of the ladybugs. But I'm going to talk about using these photo cards, which are very easy to find on the internet once you search. Now, the teacher would help the students find these photo cards. And what I'm presenting for you here are photos of the Asian ladybug, which is one of the most variable species in the world with a range of color forms. So now, how might students make sense of these photo cards to investigate what a typical ladybug looks like? So this is their data. These photo cards are their data. So with beginning students, teachers might provide more guidance when coming up with a statistical investigative question, the overarching question that begins the investigation. So a statistical investigative question can be a summary question, a summary or a descriptive question. So here I present a couple. What does a ladybug usually look like? How many spots do ladybugs typically have? It might also be a comparison question. Do red ladybugs tend to have more spots than black ladybugs? Now, as you think about these questions, the next thing you think about is, how am I going to collect the data to answer these questions using the photo cards? Remember that collecting data always requires careful measurement. So even for young students, it's important to wrestle with the question, for example, with the photo descriptions. Look at these two photos. What is a spot versus a blemish? For example, the class may define the difference between a spot and a blemish and might decide not to count spots that are on the margins of the etra, which is the hard wing cover. Or what if a photo is not clearly focused? Do you attempt to use or discard that photo? So even at a very young age, we want students to be thinking about how they're going to take their measurements and the precision of their measurements. All right. So now let's think about actual data collection questions. So in the consider collect stage of the statistical problem solving process, beginning level A students might look at just one variable, like the number of spots. Now this is a quantitative variable, and more advanced level A students could consider multiple variables, like the color of the ladybug's body or the color of their spots, which are both categorical. Data collection questions need to be developed with the aim of collecting the information that will begin to answer the statistical investigative question. Now, one of the things that we're promoting that students at a young age use, which you use in New Zealand, are data cards. So students can use data cards to organize the variable values for each ladybug picture, where each data card represents a case, as shown above the table here on the slide. These physical data cards can assist beginning students to develop understanding of what is a case, which is a very challenging concept even for advanced students in statistics. Now here we have one ladybug in a photo with 6 black spots and a red body, and we have another ladybug in a photo with 10 black spots and an orange body. The students might next create a table, also shown here on the slide. So now we're into the next stage. What about our analysis questions? So after the data is gathered, it's useful to graph the data. Now, beginning level A students might use a picture graph that allows each ladybug to be identified. But as students advance, they can use a more abstract graph, such as a dot plot. Teachers should support level A students in thinking about the distribution, which includes understanding the median as a middle value, describing the variability in the distribution, such as with the range. To answer questions about certain colored ladybugs, separate dot plots with the same scale can be stacked on top of one another. These can either be hand-drawn or created using technology. Analysis questions are created and might prompt some different representations or even some different data collection. So now here are some possible student responses. As these analysis questions are developed and answered, they aid in answering the statistical investigative question. Teachers should encourage the level A students to state their conclusions in terms of the sample, but then the students begin to think about the feasibility of inferring to a larger population of ladybugs. Here we consider, among other things, that ladybugs in our sample with a red body tend to have more spots than ladybugs with a black body. The students should be reminded that these are ladybugs of the species Asian lady beetles. So then they might be asked the question, how would they feel about inferring the conclusion to another species type? Or we might have students begin to informally reason with classification, a very key objective in data science. For example, we might ask, for the Asian lady beetles, if I picked one of the ladybug cards out of a hat and it has 6 spots, what color do you predict it will be? So we began having them think about really the idea of classification and prediction at a very young age at level A. So this is our ladybug example. And one of the things that we want teachers to think about is this is what we're proposing for level A. But think about how you could take these ladybugs and expand the statistical reasoning to level B and level C. Okay, now let's go to level B, Dollar Street. With teacher guidance, young students at level A were able to use picture cards of ladybugs to begin investigating the characteristics of ladybugs and to begin experiencing the role of questioning throughout the statistical problem-solving process. They posed statistical investigative questions. They asked questions about how to precisely measure for collecting data. They formulated data collection questions and analysis questions, and they began recognizing that new questions developed throughout the problem-solving process. A reminder that the statistical investigative process is not linear. As students transition to level B, we want them to become much more independent in formulating their questions. And we propose one wonderful way to do this with non-traditional data is with Dollar Street. Dollar Street is a website that is part of Gapminder. So if you're familiar with Hans Rosling and his website, Gapminder, Dollar Street is the website of his daughter-in-law, Anna Rosling. And Dollar Street represents that data can be used to understand pressing issues that are relevant to the world's population. It represents for us that data can be large and complex, that it can be manipulated through apps and online interfaces. And the other thing that Dollar Street illustrates for us is that sometimes one does not have access to the raw data. Dollar Street gives us pictures as data. And one thing that students are starting to recognize is that pictures as data are increasingly more common because it is so easy to take photos, especially with our smart devices. So this, I think, is just a wonderful quote by Anna Rosling. And this was really sort of her motive for creating this website. How are people's concepts of family and living spaces similar or different across the world? And here's a quote from Anna. People in other cultures are often portrayed as scary or exotic. This has to change. We want to show how people really live. It seems natural to use photos as data so people can see for themselves what life looks like on different income levels. Dollar Street lets you visit many, many homes all over the world without traveling. So how did the data collection work for Dollar Street? Well, families across the world were asked to volunteer, and a photographer was sent to spend the day with the family. And approximately 150 photos were taken of each family and their living space. These photos are on the website and they serve as your data. And here is the link to access Dollar Street. And if you just Google Dollar Street, it comes right up for you. So what is our concept of family? And a question we might ask is, what does the typical family photograph look like? Now, here are a few photographs that I chose to share with you. And you will notice that in these photographs, there's a dollar amount along with the country where the photo came from. This is a variable that they define on Dollar Street, and they have a nice formula that they give you for how they come up with this dollar amount. But it's basically an estimate of the monthly consumption per adult living in the living space expressed in terms of dollars spent. And as I said, they give you all the information on the website as to how they calculated that. So what would we want a level B student to do with these pictures? Well, we would want the students to explore and notice and wonder. We would hope that they might start proposing statistical investigative questions and trying to informally answer those questions by using the photos. So what do you notice? What do you wonder? Well, some of the things that we noticed were that the families seemed at ease. Some of them were smiling, others are not, but all seem calm and serene. We noticed that the family size varies. We noticed that some families include an elder generation, some have one family, One parent, some have two, some families do not have children. Other families have children that are grown and not pictured. But we seem to think that the concept of family as a group together seems to be the same across countries represented. So there's so many other things that you can explore with Dollar Street. You know, one of the things that I've always been fascinated with are people's front doors on their living spaces. I live out in a rural area in Georgia, and I find myself when I'm going down the road and looking at people's houses, I'm looking to see what their doors look like. Are they ornate? Are they plain? Are they colored certain ways? Are they metal? So I decided I think I'd like to look at the front doors across the world. And so what do I kind of notice at the most basic level with the doors that I've given you here? The doors all over the world seem to be made from similar materials, mostly wood, sometimes metal, sometimes cloth. But most of the photos show that they're wood doors. Now here are 4 doors across the economic spectrum that are all made of wood. Notice there seems to be some variation in the doors without considering the entire monthly consumption. But in the low consumption group, for example, the doors often do not have locks and they're less ornate. Why in the high consumption group, locks and they sometimes have many locks. Now, this is what I did. I took the doors where I first considered them just looking at different doors here across the spectrum, the money spectrum. But then I said, well, I want to look at more doors within each of the consumption levels. So I controlled for income level, high consumption, medium, and low. And then I started comparing the doors within each of those. So even though there are differences among the doors, what we found most striking were the similarities. That particularly when focused on a specific economic band, students see that there's very little variation across the doors in the world. So this is just a small taste of what we are proposing that we try to start introducing our students to at a very young age. And notice these are just examples from level A and level B. Level C, the secondary level, we also have more data science type activities there. One that I think that you would particularly enjoy is about lizards. And I knew that I wouldn't have time to go through the lizard example with you today, but fortunately, there is a blog piece that has the lizards plus the ladybugs written up. And if you go to this link, you can read about the lizards, and it's a really wonderful classification problem for the secondary level that you can consider. So as you think about these activities, as I said before, think about how you might incorporate these into your classroom. Think about what the learning outcomes are that you hope to convey to your students throughout these examples. And think about the role of questioning and how the role of questioning is so important throughout all the processes and all the components. So let me leave you with my big takeaways. My first takeaway is the statistical problem solving process is fundamental when thinking about all data and all studies. Think about how data comes in all shapes and sizes. Think about how when we use the word collect data, that also means we need to consider, we need to manipulate the data, we may need to transform the data, we may need to process it, we may need to clean the data. And realize that I think questioning is probably the single most important thing throughout the statistical problem solving process. Also, keep in mind the probabilistic nature of your interpretations. And finally, the important role that ethics plays. So thank you once again for inviting me back to New Zealand. I had to put this picture here. This is from last year when I was over in New Zealand. And I look at this picture often as we are here in our COVID world. in the United States, and I think about your lovely country. Questions? Anna, are there any questions in the chat? Let me stop sharing here. Okay.
Yes, sorry, Chris. There was a question about from Zan about whether any students have queried that black ladybugs are actually red ladybugs with an infinite number of black spots.
Oh, that's a good question. I can't answer that question. I haven't encountered that.
But yes, if there are any other questions, you're welcome to pop them in the chat box, and Pip and I can either read them out, or you can pop on your microphone and ask it yourself.
I might comment that so much of the work that's in the new GAZE 2 document with this important role of questioning is due to the research from Pip. And so I do want to call out Pip and just the impact that she had on this document. And I think once you see the document, you're definitely going to see the New Zealand influence in this document. So we are just internally grateful for what Pip brought to the writing team with this document.
Well, there's no more questions, but Anne wrote a comment here about ladybug infestations in New Zealand. Do you want to talk about that, Anne?
Oh, hi. I just think it's really topical because we have loved our ladybirds here in New Zealand for so long because they're sort of individual creatures and they help partners. And now we've this Asian beetle. It's called a harlequin beetle. They are horrible little things. They cluster. They live in groups and they're disgusting. And I was down at Paddock to play with the kids, and the teacher picked up, and the kid said, "Oh, here's a ladybug," and the teacher just grabbed it between her fingers and scrunched it. And that to me is just, you don't do that to ladybirds. But she said, "Oh, it's one of those infested types," and I'm horrified, but you've got to consider it. They were eating the plants and not very nice.
They're not very nice.
No.
We sometimes, in fact, we're in our fall right now, our autumn here in the United States. And in the month of October, that's when the ladybugs really come out. So we find little ladybugs everywhere in our house, that along with the stink bugs. And so this past October, I'm like, I love that ladybug example, but I'm getting tired of the ladybugs that are infesting my house right now.
Yeah, and that's the marmorated stink bug. That's our big issue in New Zealand. Well, it's coming.
Yeah.
So that's going to be
stink bugs are bad here. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's a really great
yeah, I think so. I mean, it's it maybe that can lead to some investigative questions for the students in terms of the ladybugs. Pip was one that worked really diligently on that example. So she's very familiar with the ladybugs.
So much so I send Chris photos of ladybugs every time I find them in my office.
I know. When we were writing the document, we would be sending each other photos of different ladybugs that we were finding. I'm like, oh, we're obsessing over this. But I do think what's wonderful about that example is how you can introduce students at a very young age to a different way that data is presented to them and get them very comfortable with sort of the non-traditional data types.
I think stink bugs is the kids, imagine the little kindergarten kids with a whole lot of stink bugs.
I hadn't thought about that, but that could be the next example that we write up is, or just take the ladybug example and modify it with stink bugs. That's great. Definitely check out the lizard scenario through the blog piece that's at level C. I think that one gives you a really nice sense of what we're promoting with prediction and classification, you know, which are really new ideas in our curriculum here in the United States at the secondary. In fact, that's really not very, very lightly touched upon even in our advanced placement statistics class. So many people have said we're pushing the envelope with this new document. And I kind of laugh and say, we're pushing the envelope. New Zealand's been doing this forever. I said, we got to catch up with New Zealand here in the States. So
I think one of the other things that's really nice about the ladybug example is it's a nice way to bring categorical and some simple number data into kids at a young age, because we often struggle for good examples of using number data at the lower levels. There is another question here, and this might be an open to anyone to answer. It says, thank you and have really enjoyed the Dollar Street website. Are there any, I'm assuming it's similar websites to that one that people know of, like Dollar Street? That I guess it's that idea of having a rich representation. So there's one I would recommend if you haven't seen it, that's Anna's website. Anna, you can probably drop your link in, but I certainly know that your Rating Cats and Dogs is a really lovely example of some photo data cards that you can use with students. And in case people aren't, there's also the stats, our Statistics and Data Science Educator online journal that we have. And of course, you should always be looking at Census at School, and NZ Maths has some good resources, but they're not necessarily like you're asking there about the Dollar Street, which is actually the data is in the photos. So, you know, I think they are really good. And I would also recommend, while I've got the chances, have a look at the World's Largest Lesson. Now, that's not so much about seeing photos, but it's actually got some lovely context. It links to the 17 global goals for sustainability. And it's a really nice place if you're looking for other contexts to work with kids, particularly secondary age kids. They are really interested in the world around them.
I just added one link there, which is one where you can pull in photos from Pixabay and you can sort them, and you can generate data from those to explore as well. But I put the link in for Chris's blog post, and if you go to the post after hers, I had to go after her. So
I was just grateful that I went before Anna and I didn't have the pressure on me.
So I had to go after her, and that one's a links to that last post that the last link that I just shared about using photos to look at data and so forth.
Right.
I'm just copying down your link, and then, okay, are there any more questions for Chris? Okay, I'm going.
Well, I want to thank you again for giving me this opportunity to be with you today. It's Friday afternoon here, and I hope by tomorrow we got some definitive news in the United States about the next 4 years.
We too.
Yeah, it's an interesting time here in the United States. It's just a very interesting time, you know, with the election, with COVID. I keep thinking I'm just so ready for 2021 to come. It's start fresh.
Awesome. All right, well, I'm going to take the opportunity to just thank Chris again. Chris, I think I was on a walk and talking to you, and I had this really good brainwave that you could maybe do a keynote for us. And you said yes, so I just want to thank you again for that. And I just love that our morning is actually a really good time for you, whereas your morning would not be a good time for us.
No.
We'd be asleep. So that's been awesome.
And your afternoon is not a good time for me.
No. So this is perfect for us.
Yeah, this was perfect.
Yeah.
It really was.
So I just want to also thank everybody who's joined us this morning with, you know, we can get wonderful people in, but it's always better for the people that actually come along and listen and then take those ideas and make a difference in the classrooms in our country. And I just want to thank you for giving up your time. I know that I say to people, I'm out Saturday morning, they go, why? I go, oh, I'm just going to be online. But actually, I can't miss any of them. I have to hang for all four because there's always such really interesting stuff on. So just looking ahead, if I can get my screen to work. Oh, too far. So